Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I am your host, Dr. Heidi Horsley, in partnership with the Compassionate Friends, and I'm here today with my guest co-host, Doneley Meris. Hi, Doneley.
Hi.
Doneley is one of my dear friends, and we met at ADAC, which is the Association for Deaf Educators and Counselors, where he was in charge of the Diversity Committee.
That's right.
And he does a lot of work in the grief and loss world, and we are going to talk today about friends losing friends. And I'm sorry that Dr. Gloria isn't here, but Doneley is going to do a great job. So I appreciate him filling in. Let me give you a little bit of background about Doneley before we introduce our other guests. Doneley is the founder and executive director of the HIV Arts Network. He is an adjunct faculty member at NYU and at Hunter College. And he is a psychotherapist and an HIV/AIDS mental health training consultant. So Doneley, welcome and thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
And we have two other guests today that are going to join us. And Doneley, I'm going to have you introduce them because you know them well. And we will be talking today about friends losing friends. So Doneley.
The two panelists that we have today are Hal Bromm and Sir Rodney, sir. Hal is a gallerist. He established his contemporary art gallery in Tribeca 43 years ago. That was 1975. That's a long time. And he's represented over the course of 43 years many artists who lived and died from HIV/AIDS. Two of whom are Luis Frangella and David Wojnarowicz. They have a current show at his gallery. And in another setting, we'll probably be talking about that also. But Hal has been passionate about the health and wellness of artists living with HIV, and he is a founding member and a founding board member of HIV Arts Network.
Wow. And
he is not only a gallerist, but he's also a historic preservationist. He was the past president of the Historic District Council here in New York City, and is very active in Knowlton Township in New Jersey, where he founded a historic commission that's preserving a lot of buildings and a lot of sites in Warren County, New Jersey.
Enough about me.
Sir Rodney, sir, is a AAA. He's an artist, he's an activist, and he is a advocate for people living with HIV. He was a board member of, he is a board member and a volunteer with Visual AIDS, which is an organization that provides support and archival support for people living with HIV, artists in particular. And he, there's an interesting work that he did in 2008 where he set up a counseling booth in a highway and he called it free advice. So people would just pass by and they would sit in his chair and they would get advice from Sir Rodney.
Wow, so. I love that. That is very cool.
Yeah.
So he would give them advice as they wanted it, and he wouldn't charge them anything.
Exactly. That was the performance.
I love it.
But he took breaks from his work as an artist and an archivist and an activist over the course of 40 years to take care of friends who lived with and died from AIDS, and that's the passion that he continues to have today.
Wow, I love it. I love it. So over the years, it sounds like you have both lost a lot of friends.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, we talked earlier about this. Have you seen things change over the years? Do you feel like, back in the 70s, I imagine there wasn't a lot of understanding or support and a lot of misunderstanding about HIV and AIDS and
fear.
Fear. Okay, talk to me more about that, Hal. What was going on at that time period?
There were a lot of hospital workers and health workers were afraid of contagion, and I think a lot of early cases before HIV was really understood, I think there was a lot of concern about how it was contracted. Could you catch it if you were treating someone who had this mystery disease? If you touched them, was that dangerous? What about body fluids, so on and so forth?
So I'm wondering, in your case, were there times where you had friends that had HIV where you became fearful yourself? Like, oh my gosh, can I get this? Or was that not?
I don't remember having that, and it was probably just because I didn't think of it.
Yeah.
But I don't know, when did they pick up on the reality that it was not something that you could easily get from casual contact?
They never really picked up on it.
Okay.
I mean, even though there was education out there, people's fear overrides any kind of reason.
Yeah.
And they find out that today people are still fearful of it. And even when we knew about the contagion things, you still had the police officers with their gloves on if they were at an AIDS
The
demonstration,
latex
the rubber
gloves.
gloves. You'd still have people that, they say, well, what if they're wrong? There's that fear overtakes any kind of reasoning. So it was a real problem, it was a real stigma, and prevented a lot of people from even informing people that they had AIDS, right? But really close friends, so a lot of people died in obscurity or disappeared back to their families because they didn't want people to know.
That's what I remember in the earliest cases where people, well, if you didn't know what you had, which the earliest friend I lost, I remember, was Harry Gramillion, who lived in Paris. And I got a call saying he was very sick. And I thought, well, how sick could he be? He's a young guy, And then I said, well, gee, what's going on? And the answer was nobody really knew what was going on. But there was another call a week later saying, if you want to see him alive, you should come to France right now.
Wow.
And I thought, holy, gee, that's pretty dramatic. And then after that, I think what Rodney's saying, there were people, I remember people here in New York who simply vanished. You would see them 1 week, and then a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later, they wouldn't be around anymore. And then you would hear they were dead.
Wow.
And it was very dramatic and very a shock. And then everyone would put things together and figure out, oh, gee, they must have died of AIDS.
That's really
But
disturbing.
that was once we had a name for it.
Yeah.
In the early stages, there was no name for it. It was just this kind of mysterious gay plague kind of deal.
And that's so scary.
It was
because
scary,
you're like,
yeah.
okay, all my friends are disappearing
Yeah.
and dying, and nobody seems to know
Nobody
why
knew why
and how.
And it was very difficult sometimes to find out because the family, if they did know it, didn't want to talk about it, because if they wanted to do some kind of a service, a religious service, the religious churches didn't want them to mention it. It would bring shame to the families. They wouldn't
Stigma.
talk about it. The stigma was really heavy.
Yeah.
I had a friend that was being buried in a cemetery, and because it was known that he had AIDS, he had to have his casket encased in concrete before they would put it into the ground.
That's unbelievable.
Right. I mean, it was amazing. I would go to visit friends in their hospital rooms, and you had to wear these space suits to go in, right? And the food would be piled up outside because the people that were to serve the food didn't want to go in the room for fear of contaminants. I mean, it was really, really, that was the fear that was driving it, but particularly with the family. There were a lot of people that just disappeared. They were getting really sick. They went home to their families. None of their friends ever got to say goodbye. We'd find out about it later. They'd be dead, and we'd hear something.
And here they were with their chosen families and their families in New York City, and then they had to leave and are isolated.
Right.
And there were the sadness, the grief was someone just disappearing. I mean, when you think of places in the world where repressive governments make people disappear because they disagree with, the higher ups, it was kind of a parallel to that in a way, because suddenly someone would be gone.
Right.
And there was you couldn't say goodbye. You didn't really know what was going on. They were embarrassed by it, whatever. It was awful.
It sounds horrible.
To lose someone and know that they're ill and watch them decline and maybe be a caretaker, maybe try to comfort them in a hospice kind of manner, palliative manner. But this was just disappearing was took all that away.
And these were young guys oftentimes in the prime of their lives.
Yeah, and it was believed that this whole thing was like some kind of like gay cancer, right? So there were people that were not gay that were also getting infected, but
true.
you know, it was sort of like the sign line. They were stigmatized. Well, they must have been doing this, and then there was this thing about people feeling that because it was transmitted sexually, that we really brought it upon ourselves because we were too sexual.
So they were blaming the people that were sick.
Blame the
Blame the
victim.
people
Saying
that
it's
were
your
Blame the
fault.
victim,
It's your
exactly.
fault because
Blame
you
the
were
victim.
homosexual and you decided to have sex. Meanwhile, they didn't talk about anything about the women, the straight women that were having
Right.
sex, or the people who were president, or the IV drug users that were the first ones to really
You're
get
right-
AIDS
you're
up
right,
in
it
the
became a
Bronx. The
gay
epidemic
disease.
was in the Bronx,
Yeah.
which is the poor communities
Yeah.
with people doing drugs. They used to call it some sort of wasting thing with junkies, but it was really AIDS.
Wow. Doneley, what are your thoughts on this?
One of the reasons why Hal and I and other friends created HIV Arts Network is because most of the people in the arts community were not getting any support. Yes, you have a painter or a sculptor who spends most of his or her time in the studio, maybe have sex occasionally, and they find out that they're HIV positive. And where does this person go? They're not really connected to a community. And
What Don means is where does that person go
Right.
for psychological
Right. And support, yes.
social support, you know, creating a network of care for that situation.
Which
But
I love that you did this because there was so much stigma. I mean, I would think even with the professionals there was stigma. And so, like
Yeah.
you said,
There
where's a
still
safe
is.
place
There
to
still
go?
is, yeah.
There still
Okay,
is.
well, sir, you're making a good point. I mean, we're talking as if this is not the case today, but like you said, it's still, we don't want to believe that it is still the case, and there's still a lot of misinformation out there, and there's still a lot of blaming the victim.
Yeah, there's still a lot of blaming the victim. People that are living with AIDS or HIV positive are seen as deadly weapons, so they're not supposed to be sexual. So if you're having sex, you can be up for being thrown in jail under HIV and criminalization laws if your partner will say that they were not informed that you had HIV, right? And if the person knows that they have HIV, even though they've been communicating and been with this person for a long time, they have to prove that the person did, which is, you know, it's the proof is put on the victim and not on the person to actually prove that they didn't know. So there are people being thrown in jail. It's like a law that's meant for control, and it's preventing people from getting tested. So there are a lot of people that are infected out there that won't get tested so they don't have to deal
if
with
they're
that.
not tested and they don't know that they're positive, then they can't be accused of
Right?
Right.
Infecting people.
infecting people.
Wow.
Right.
Right.
And so, Doneley, tell me more about the HIV, the network. What is it called that you did? The
HIV Arts Network.
Yes, HIV Arts Network.
Again, the reason why we created this this organization is because we needed to provide mental health and social services to these artists and performers also, and people who are people who are basically doing their creative process and removed from mainstream society's connections to medical care, mental health care, and that continues today. There's a lot of artists who have been positive for 20, 25 years who are not connected to any community, and thank God we have visual aids where they're getting support from an organization that's looking at their art and maybe archiving their art, which is a good thing. But the mental health element to it is not there, and that's why we created this organization.
So what happens in a community when all these people are disappearing and dying? I mean, how do people mourn those losses? And I mean, what does that look like?
Well, there are a few. When I think of it, there's three things that came out of it. There was there were like the protests at the things where there were some memorials where they remember the family that didn't want any mention of AIDS or any mention that their son had AIDS. That happened at, I think, was it for Donald Woods had his memorial, and Osoto Saint stood up and just marched up to the podium and said he was a homosexual, was a proud homosexual, he did all this stuff, and then all the gay men got up and walked out.
Wow.
You know, but I think that there was, I think that the memorial thing was turned into a high art form. I mean, we did some incredible memorials. I mean, it really changed the game of what a memorial could look like, because we
Wow,
got so
that's
good, and they started becoming very creative because it was coming out of an arts community.
What kind of things, Rodney, did they do? What kind of
Well, I mean, you know, you
memorials?
take it into an arts community, so I mean, the programs were really interesting. There were performances that were a part of it, and intermedia, interactive things that happened, and you know, I mean, just the lives that the artists were living and the people that had to speak, it was kind of like really outside of the realm of what people expected someone that was like a professor in a college.
And I would imagine artwork came out of all this. I mean, like, you know, artwork that made a lot of statements about what was going on.
We lost so many friends, but I made so many new friends because there were friends that I had that I was really close to that had other friends that I weren't as close to, that I sort of knew casually as a friend of this friend of mine. But through the AIDS thing, we sort of bonded more, and some of them have become really good friends that might not have happened had this friend not have died. We would have still remained kind of casual.
Right.
So, you know, that's the one
Yeah,
great thing that's come out of it, that I've met some wonderful people
new
through
people and amazing people.
through the bonds with these
Yeah.
friends that I've lost.
And Hal, did you see the art? How did you see all of this represented in art? I mean, I know you've had a gallery since what, 1975?
Well, some, that's right. Some artists, I mean, we were talking earlier about David Wojnarowicz and Luis Frangella. Luis kept making art after he became ill, right up to the end. He could barely move his hand, he could barely speak, but he would do rough little, almost doodle-like sketches and put his initials at the bottom because he still felt that that was his mission in life, was to create art, to make art. And other people who didn't lose their faculties the way Luis did created art that was much more, I won't say, protest is the wrong word, but they made art that was sharper or perhaps darker. I'm thinking of Keith Haring's late work, where a lot of his early work was so fun and uplifting, and the crawling baby and the barking
pop art.
dog,
Yeah,
and
I love all that
you know,
stuff.
all that imagery, the iconography that we associate with Haring. His later works, as his life started to go downhill, became very dark, very introspective, a lot of black, a lot of heavy, dark coloration. And when you look at them today, you can see that this is a person who is creating, at the end of his life, was creating work that was reflecting how he
His
felt
life.
inside.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah. David Wojnarowicz maintained a sharp mind and a good hand at making art very much through his life until the end. I mean, not the bitter end. At the bitter end, he changed completely, and that's another subject. But his work became, I think, very, very powerful and very strong. And his funeral, well, I mean, it was a huge public demonstration. Streets in New York City were closed.
Wow, that's amazing.
People marched with banners. I mean, his death and he politically he was very active, and he raged for years against political inaction, not just about AIDS, but just in general about
Right.
you know, corporate America running everything, about little people being left out of the equation.
Love it. Yeah.
I mean, David was a very forceful personality and a very strong voice as a writer, as a poet, as an artist, and his funeral was extraordinary.
His funeral sounds like it was reflective of who he was in life.
Yeah, and
a celebration of that.
and he inspired people
Yeah.
in a huge way. So that, I think there are recordings of it, aren't there?
Oh yeah. There's all that stuff was recorded. I mean, there were like James Wensley and some of the women from Diva TV and stuff were recording everything, all the demonstrations, everything that happened. So there's a huge archive of that material.
Wow.
We've only seen fractions of it.
You should talk a little bit about
So-
what you do at Visual Aids with artists who are gone and artists who are here but impacted.
Yes, and before you do that, I just want to ask Doneley to weigh in on this. And I want to know, Doneley, you know, you're a psychotherapist. How do you see people grieving the losses of friends as a result of AIDS? Do you see that it's any different? Do you see that it's similar? And what do you find helps people?
What's interesting in the past, I would say 15 years, is some of the artists who were creating art in the 80s and 90s not only created art or continue to create art, but also went into the profession of mental health. I'm talking about somebody who might have been a dancer but cannot dance anymore and went to social work school and now doing counseling to other artists or dancers. And that's giving back to their community in a different way.
So that's
more helpful.
Grieving through their work.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's not an uncommon situation because their creative process is pretty much gone, but they created a second career to continue being in that community to help them out, which is a great thing.
I love that, to kind of make meaning out of what they've been through.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I know a number of people that have gone into end-of-life doula work for that sort of thing, and I work with a group of HIV doulas that kind of are not so much about, they say that when the person goes through when they're diagnosed with AIDS, basically you're just given a bunch of medications, told to go on a bunch of appointments, you're left on your own. So there's a lot of things that the people have to sort of work through.
Yeah.
So as death doulas, we help work them through it because they know what they have to do, but they just need support.
Oh, I
What's
love
the
that.
name of it again?
What would an HIV doula do? It comes out as a question, but it's actually a group.
Yeah.
And there's some birth doulas with it, some end-of-life doulas.
I've heard of
a lot
birth
of
doulas, so there's death doulas that help
Yeah.
you to have a good death. Is that?
Well, they work with they work with people to create just the space for them, a comfortable space for them to die for their transition, and also work with people that are their support system that don't really know what they should do. Should I touch them?
Yes.
Should I this? Should I that? Just to kind of create an environment and so that the person that's transitioning can deal comfortably and doesn't have to freak out about like what their grandmother's thinking that's sitting over in the corner. The doula can
I
help.
love this idea, and I'm also thinking it might stimulate some conversation, end of life conversations.
Oh,
To
yeah,
have someone like
absolutely.
you there,
Right.
coordinating all this.
Yeah, but with the doula thing, it's not so much about. Well, we work a lot with the actual clients and clients. We call them clients, not really clients. The community to help them create a safe space for them where they can. Meet other people and challenge their ideas, but we're also into confronting the system, like what is there in the system that's creating this? So
Right.
to recognize it so that we can go at the system and be able to talk to the system to make it not so difficult for these people that have to move through the system.
Yeah, I like that. I love that. It reminds me of some of the
know.
hospice stuff that gets done at the end of life.
Yeah, like a pregnant woman who's in a prison and they have her in her arms and her legs chained while she's on giving birth. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's not really needed, don't you think? She's
Right.
not going to get up and run someplace. I mean, you can take the chains off. We can.
Right.
Yeah.
And have
Yeah.
some dignity at the end
Right,
of life
right.
too. So I'm wondering for the three of you, what have you seen that's helped you? Because I assume all of you have lost friends. And what have you seen that's helped you to go through the journey and get into a place of healing?
I'm thinking of a good friend. I met him when we were undergrad at UCLA. He was a theater person. He was a musical theater person, and he lost three lovers from HIV/AIDS. And after the third person who he was with for 7 years, he switched and went to nursing school. And now he's advocating for a lot of Hollywood actors and actresses who are living with HIV and luring them in, and he provides support group services for those artists in that community, and he's inspiring because he allows a generation of new artists to be part of the community still, and not just be washed away or be set aside. And I think that's important for us to continue the process. allowing those people who have the history of this disease to still be part of what's happening today.
Yeah, and to be able to talk about it, because in social spaces, I mean, I can still bring up the subject of AIDS at a dinner party and everyone freezes and stops. And I remember having a dinner party where I had a bunch of men around, and I didn't know what their status was, but someone mentioned something and someone picked up on it, and then they all discovered that they were all HIV positive or living with AIDS, but I didn't even know it at the time because it was such a thing. You don't know how comfortably you can talk about this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And once they'd realized that we were in a space where everyone sort of was connected or interested in some kind of a way, it just flourished, and it was like wonderful for them. I mean, that's the thing the Visual AIDS offers, because they create all these programmings around art, but also messaging AIDS. So we pull in a lot of those communities of people that just come there, and even if they're not artists or something, they'd realize that it's a place where they can come and meet other people who are living with HIV and AIDS, and they can talk very fluidly about a lot of stuff that's going on, and they feel like supported.
One of the comforting things about grieving, particularly for me in terms of artists who are gone, is to look at their work and realize that through their work they're still alive, at least for me, and I take comfort from that. If I can look at a beautiful work of art by any artist who's gone, doesn't have to be HIV or AIDS, it could be death from any reason, but that tangible memory that they've left behind is very valuable in terms of a comfort in grieving. And I think if we think about people who are great filmmakers or great sculptors or great painters or great actors or great dancers, look at an old movie. The stars of the movie are gone, and you may have loved them for whatever reason, but if you can watch that movie again, you can take comfort from seeing them perform at the top of their talent. And, that's pretty valuable, I think.
I absolutely agree with you. We have to wrap up, so I want you to quickly tell me how people can find you, Hal.
Through my gallery. I'm at
Through your gallery.
90 West Broadway in Tribeca,
Okay, very
where I've
good.
been for a long time.
I love it.
And it's halbromm.com.
halbromm.com. And Sir Rodney?
How can people find me?
Yeah. Google you.
If you follow a lot of activities that are happening on HIV and AIDS, particularly visual AIDS, I'll pop up somewhere. And I'm
Very
not on
good.
the board anymore. I kind of stepped down from the board, but I'm
Okay.
still very actively involved in the organization because I work with artist estates and a lot of them with HIV and AIDS. So I'm
Okay, you're out
involved in
there.
a lot of their programming.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
And what about you, Doneley? Where can we find you?
HIV Arts Network.org, and everything is in there.
Right, wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Heidi.
And for all of you out there, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own. Thank you.